All right, so let's talk for a minute about the endocrine system. We know the endocrine system is a system of glands located throughout your body which secrete hormones. And these hormones are cell signals which help to regulate things like the concentration of substances, glucose, calcium ions, phosphate ions in your body, in your blood or your body fluids. They might help to regulate the reproductive process. They might control growth. And they also help to regulate the rate of metabolism. As I said before, hormones are chemical signals or ligands. They travel through the bloodstream to specific target cells that have receptors for those specific hormones. Once a hormone attaches to a receptor, it triggers some kind of response in that target cell. As I said earlier, most hormones are made of proteins or peptides. This means that the receptors for them have to be located on the outside of the cell membrane because proteins have a hard time entering cells. We also mentioned earlier that there are some exceptions to that rule. Hormones like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, aldosterone, even progesterone, those are steroid-based hormones. They're made of lipids. They can penetrate the cell membrane. They bind to receptors that are intracellular. And together that hormone and that receptor go through the nuclear membrane, bind to specific genes, and act as transcription factors. Essentially, they are turning on certain genes, causing them to be transcribed and ultimately translated into proteins. So while we're talking about the endocrine system, let's talk about some hormone control mechanisms. Most important thing to talk about here is homeostasis. So this is when your body has to maintain certain things within very specific parameters. Things like temperature, your blood glucose levels, your blood calcium levels, your heart rate, your blood pressure. So it's about keeping steady internal conditions. So one of the main functions of your endocrine system is to maintain homeostasis. And one of the main ways it helps to do that is through what are called negative feedback loops. So a negative feedback loop is when the product of a reaction leads to a decrease in that reaction. They're responsible for the stabilization of your body. They always push your body toward the homeostatic set point. The way your body regulates temperature, thermoregulation is an example of this. The way your body regulates blood glucose levels is an example. The way your body regulates blood calcium levels is another example. So let's talk a bit about negative feedback loops. So here are the basic components. First of all, there's some kind of stimulus that causes a change in the variable, moving it away from the set point. There's some type of receptor that senses the change in that variable. There's a control center that compares the changes to the set point. Usually this control center is in your brain, and typically it's the hypothalamus. Then there's an effector. This is a structure in your body that can make adjustments to the variable. And finally, there's a response. So let's look at a real example. Let's look at glucose maintenance. So let's say that you eat something really sugary, or you drink a Coke or something like that. The stimulus here would be your blood glucose levels start to rise. All right, there are receptors that are going to pick up changes in the blood glucose levels. Those are located in your pancreas. There's a control center in your hypothalamus that communicates with these receptors and realizes that your blood glucose levels are changing. In response to that, your pancreas is going to release insulin. And insulin is going to flow out to cells in your body, like the liver and other cells, telling them to take up blood glucose. So the response is going to be that certain cells, in this case the liver and the body cells, are acting as effectors. They're pulling glucose out of the blood and they're storing it. This causes blood glucose levels to decline. So that's your response, always pushing back down to normal. And this loop will continue until the blood glucose levels get back to this homeostatic set point, at which time the pancreas stops releasing insulin, which means that the liver and the cells stop taking up glucose from the body fluids in the blood. So there are also things called positive feedback loops. And this occurs when the product of a reaction causes that reaction to increase even further. This is not about homeostasis. Positive feedback loops are about amplifying something, about making something big happen fast. An example would be breast milk production and release. So suckling acts as a stimulus that causes the production of milk. At first, there's not much made. But once the baby gets some milk, it suckles more, which causes the release of more prolactin, more milk production, more release. More suckling happens, that causes even more, and it's just a loop. Same kind of thing happens with childbirth. So a baby's head pushes on the cervix. That causes the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin binds to receptors in the uterus and causes it to contract. Well, this pushes the baby's head even further into the cervix, causing more pressure, which causes the release of even more oxytocin. This causes the uterus to contract even more, which pushes that baby's head even harder into the cervix. And it's a loop, and that continues to ratchet up until the baby is born. Here are just a few examples of endocrine glands in your body. So the hypothalamus is sort of the control center of the entire endocrine system. What's cool about the hypothalamus is it's part of both the endocrine and the nervous systems, and it plays a role in regulating both of them. Located just below the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. This gland releases things like HGH, human growth hormone. It also releases ADH, antidiuretic hormone, which is really important in your body for osmoregulation, for regulating the amount of water and solutes in your body fluids. Let's also mention the thyroid gland. Its main hormone, thyroid hormone, helps to control the rate of metabolism, the rate at which you do cell respiration in your body. Talk about the pancreas. It releases insulin and glucagon, which are crucial in regulating your blood glucose levels. And then we'll finally mention the adrenal glands. They release a lot of things. One of those being adrenaline, which helps you to respond, have the fight or flight response. But the adrenals also release hormones that help you to control things like sodium ions in your bloodstream. They also are important stress hormones, the hormones released by the adrenal. Here's another example of a negative feedback loop. So notice, let's say that something's going on with, you have low thyroxine, low thyroid hormone production for some reason. So the hypothalamus knows that. It releases a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone, which communicates with the pituitary. The pituitary then releases TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which will travel through the blood to the thyroid, telling the thyroid to make more thyroxine, more thyroid hormone. Well, the levels of thyroxine are being monitored by the pituitary, and when they get to a certain crucial level where they're supposed to be, the pituitary, and they're also being monitored by the hypothalamus, by the way, and when those levels get to where they're supposed to be, the hypothalamus stops releasing this, the pituitary stops releasing this, which means that the thyroid can stop releasing that. So get back to homeostasis and then stop the process. That's a negative feedback loop. All right, so that's it for the endocrine system. We'll stop there.